Senator, I heard a couple of questions in there about the special counsel. On a semi-related matter, Congressman Cummings today is calling for a vote to hold a member of the White House in contempt for refusing a subpoena with regards to some questionable practices in security clearances at the White House. This was all brought forth by a whistleblower who works at the White House. Yeah. I know that's something that's close to your heart. Do you think the White House needs to come to Congress and explain what's been going on?
They have to respond to that, and they would have to show up unless there's the confidence of people that are close to the president are exempted from testifying before Congress. And I think each president kind of gets a veto on saying who or isn't that sort of a consular that retains a client-lawyer relationship.
On a different topic, State Representative Andy McKeon, who's been a Republican public servant in Iowa about as long as you've been a public servant here in Iowa, just announced that he's switching to the Democratic Party, saying both the president and the policies that he's enacting just don't represent the party that he remembers. Yeah. You are still in this party. What do you say to those from your generation who may be frustrated with what's happening right now?
Yeah. They should not be surprised at all what the president's doing. They may not like what he's doing. As you heard me say in there's some things, particularly on trade, that I don't like he's doing. But we shouldn't be surprised he's doing it because he let us know during the campaign that he was going to do certain things. And it seems to me he ends up being a president that not only ran on a platform, but he stands on that platform.
How confident?
Excuse me. Can other reporters jump in here? Or?
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm Erin Jordan with the Gazette.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, so what steps do you think the U.S. needs to be taking to prevent the swine virus here?
Yeah. The only suggestion that I've had from the swine industry, and I met with them last week, is that we've got to be very careful on all the imports coming into the country that the disease is detected and it can't get into the country.
Okay, so as a follow-up to that, to what degree, it's my understanding there's been proposed a shift for pork inspections to go on from the plant's perspective instead of the USDA inspecting those pork facilities here in the U.S. Is that, do you think that puts us at risk?
No, I think the inspection's going to have to be at the ports. Once the disease is here, it's here. The idea is don't get it into the country in the first place.
But how do we know if it gets here if we don't have tight oversight of those facilities?
Yeah, you're going to know it when all the pigs die, like they are in China, and that's what we don't want to happen here, and that's why there's so much emphasis on keeping it out of the country 100%.
Do you support the idea of inspections happening, the facilities inspecting themselves?
It's similar to what Obama did with chickens, and it seems like it's working out okay with chickens. I don't know the difference between chickens and pork, so I don't want to comment specifically on that, but I know that the previous administration made a move in that direction with poultry.
Conceptually, it seems like that inspecting itself is the problem that came up with Boeing. The not having tight enough inspections on there. Isn't it a little bit more important in our food industry to have those
Did you say
inspectors?
The Boeing airplanes you're talking
Yeah,
about?
that they were expecting themselves. There's a very tight and cozy, it's been reported often that there's a very tight and cozy relationship between the inspectors and the regulators and the company. And it sounds conceptually like that's what she's talking about.
I think you're concluding that just because you have government inspection, you don't have any diseases that get out of control. Just think of all the meat that's been called back and they got by federal inspectors.
So we shouldn't have cops because we should just expect everybody to follow the speed limit?
No, I'm just saying to you that if your faith is in government inspection, don't always have faith in government inspection, because we've had a lot of recalls of meat. As one example, that federal inspection is not a guaranteed thing either.
But so you're saying we shouldn't have inspections?
Well, we should have inspections,
Okay.
definitely. Well, that goes back, if you ever read Sinclair Upton's book,
Yes.
1912, that's why we set up the FDA and that's why we have meat inspections.
Are we adequately funding the FDA and the EPA and those regulators?
Yeah. Okay.
Senator Grassley, I had an educator ask if I would ask about why is the federal government cutting the federal education budget? A little bit out of your
Yeah.
department, but
Yeah.
they're very concerned about,
Sure.
you know, there's always concern about the Iowa budget, but now it's coming down to the federal level
See,
of cutting.
What you're asking me is, why is it in the president's budget to cut education? The typical answer, whether it's education or agriculture or anything else, a president proposes, Congress disposes. And I doubt that Congress is disposed to cut the education budget.
They're not disposed to do it?
Yeah, not disposed to do it.
Okay, very good.
But see, that isn't just because we have a Trump budget. What I just told you would be applicable to almost every president that I've served under.
Certainly, but the bigger question is, under every president you served under, how many times are they cutting education?
No, education got, if you look at what education's getting now compared to 10 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago, they're getting more money now.
In present value dollars, or are we talking percentages?
I don't know.
Sometimes that can get.
I don't know.
On another vein, another question I asked the junior senator when she was here a year ago, about when you're talking about tariffs and farming and such with China. And isn't former Governor Branstad our man in China, but we never hear from him or what his part is. Do you have any idea what
He's
he's doing?
He's not negotiating.
But he's supposed to be big friends with the Chinese president.
Yeah. But he's still not our negotiator. That's Bob Lighthizer.
But don't you think he could have a little influence at
Well,
least?
if you did, you'd never know about it.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Is there?
Senator, Iowa's been trying here for several years under a voluntary program to clean up our streams and waterways, and we're not making any progress. In fact, we're going backwards. And the EPA has the authority to enforce cleaning up the water. And so I wonder if maybe you could speak up and encourage them to do what needs to be done so that we don't continue this pollution and having algae growing in our recreational lakes and other places and creating a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico the size of New Jersey or whatever it's going to be this year.
It's pretty easy to speak up because all you're asking me to do is to make sure that federal law is enforced.
Well, why isn't it being enforced?
I don't know that it's not, because if it's not, it wasn't being enforced in the previous administration, because we had the EPA director, forget her name at the time, 2013, I think she came to our state fair, and she made a statement similar to this when she was asked about maybe the same things you're asking about. And we had just instituted the voluntary program that's in place for Iowa now. And she said it's a good program and it ought to be a pattern for other states. So at least in the previous administration, within EPA, there was a very good feeling that what Iowa was instituting to clean up its waters was going to work.
Well, are you prepared to tell them that it didn't work and that we need something more to be done? No matter what the past administration did. I
am very much a person that take an oath to uphold the law, and when the law isn't being enforced, I think it ought to be enforced.
You think it is being enforced?
I didn't say it. I thought it. I said. I've just got your word for it that it's not being enforced. I don't know, but the law should be enforced.
Well, we know it's getting worse,
Yeah.
so how can the law be getting enforced if it's getting worse?
Okay. Well, I told you that the law ought to be enforced. Go ahead. Okay.
Have you read the whole Mueller report? I know
No,
it's very
I'm
lengthy.
going to read it next week.
Okay.
But
and-
I've had my staff, 4 staff people go through it, and so I think I can answer any question you want to ask me about it.
Okay, so you have said that you don't think there was any collusion or obstruction.
Yeah, that's right. And
Okay.
there's no question about there wasn't any collusion, because that's the bottom line of Mueller's report. There wasn't any collusion, and we ought to be thankful that there wasn't any collusion. Wouldn't that be bad if we had a presidential candidate working with a foreign country to undercut our election process? That'd be bad. So that's good news. And in regard to collusion, he didn't make an indictment, so I assume that there's no wrongdoing, or there would have been charges made as a result of it.
And that's what you think too, or you're waiting to read the report?
No, that's what I think too.
Okay, and I understand the report does lay out some steps for different attorneys to, if they did want to make that case, they could, but you're saying that you're pretty certain that because
Well,
Attorney General Barr did not.
All I can say is that there was no wrongdoing, or there would have been indictments as a result of it. Or if there weren't indictments, there should have been.
Will you see an unredacted report?
Not for my public reading, but when I go to a place called the SCIF, I can see the unredacted portion, except for, I don't think we can see grand jury.
But, Senator, the news reports are, though, that the reason that Mueller did not issue an indictment for the president is that it's the Justice Department's policy not to indict a sitting president. So the notion of obstruction is still an open question. Is that something you're going to explore?
No, he could have indicted if he wanted to. You just wouldn't try a president while he's in office.
Any last question? One last question.
Okay?
Well, I'd like to invite you to Old Wine at some point.
Sure, I'll be glad to go.
Well, it's good to meet you.
Yeah. I guess Fayette, I had my town meeting in West Union
Yep,
this time.
yep, we went a little north of us. We're the Southerners.
Okay.
Good meeting.
Hold on.